Hi, everyone. My name is Scheril Powell. I am a cannabis law attorney. I love the space. I love the industry. I am learning as you're learning, but I love to share my knowledge with people interested in the industry. I have a special affinity for patients. So first, I'm going to say thank you to Florida Cannabis Coalition for providing us this platform and allowing us the opportunity to speak to you today. Most of you who are aware of things that I've done, you're familiar with me as the General Counsel of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. But in addition to being General Counsel for Minorities for Medical Marijuana, based right here in Florida, called Patients with Patients. Patients with Patients, I'll let Melanie talk about it, but I've known Melanie for many years. She is very passionate about patient access issues, patient advocacies, giving patients a voice in the cannabis space and beyond that, in their hospital experience, in their experience with their doctor visits, etc. We are very much in favor of there not being any disruption between the doctor-patient relationship. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk about some of the changes that went into effect with Governor Scott signing into law the Senate Bill 8A, and also the need for that to be in compliance with the Amendment 2, which is a constitutional amendment. So I don't want to hog all the intro time. Let Melanie introduce you to her organization so you can get to know and love Patients with Patients as much as I do.
Hi guys, how are you? Thank you for coming in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking out your Saturday to just hear what's going on with Patients and the new laws. So my name is Melanie Grand, as Scheril said, and I am founder and CEO of Patients with Patients of America. We're located here in South Florida, and we are patient liaisons for patients that need the assistance, that have chronic illnesses. It doesn't matter what illness you have. What we do is we go into the hospital and we liaison between the healthcare professional and yourself if you are a patient. Sometimes we find that chronic illness patients deal with a host of issues that become really, untapped by the healthcare professional. All they do is really try and do their best to help you get over whatever, issue you have with your disease in the moment. But then there's a host of things that happen on the outside as well as the inside. So you want to make sure that we have a core advocacy program that can really train that patient how to better manage and cope with their disease. So basically, Patients with Patients tries to help you on the case management side, help you on the social work side. We basically are your voice. If you can't speak for yourself, we will find an advocate that not only has the disease that you have so that you both can identify, but they're able to manage it so well that they're teaching you how to manage it yourself. And that's the real Achilles heel that we love to really push forward, because if I can manage something very well, I want to be able to share it with you and let you know how I was able to do it and go through and meet goals and aspirations. When it comes on to the medical marijuana initiative and the programs that are starting to come in, we know that there's a host of patients that need the access to medical marijuana. And that is what us as advocates try to figure out, how you can get that access and what's the safest way that you can get that access. And that's our main focus. So with the new amendment that has passed and everything that's going on, we really need to forge together. And that's why I thank Carlos, I thank our General Counsel Scheril, to really get us to understand what it is that the law says and how we can effectively, as patients, go through the nooks and crannies of what's going on, but also get the access that we need. I myself have sickle cell SS. I Fortunately, I haven't had to use medical marijuana, but I have a lot of patients who use and need it, and they say it treats their pain. So we make sure that if they need it, we want to get them the access. And, you know, when I speak to Scheril and I say, well, you know, there's a host of diseases that I know that, you know, have to fight. And now we're in South Florida, it's new for us. So we want to make sure that we know what we need to do in order to get that access. And also, you know, just to give you guys a little synopsis of some experiences, there's patients in the hospital that, you know, will want to pose it to their doctor, but they're scared. They don't know what to say. Maybe they feel like, you know, they'll be judged if they're choosing medical marijuana as an option. Traditional hospitals and doctors are not ready to say, let's choose that as an option of care. And so we want to meet them in the middle and say, listen, this works for her or this works for him, and what can we do? You may not really agree with it because you traditionally have been giving in high doses of medication. Maybe you've been prescribing narcotics as a physician for so long that, you know, you've never saw the option of medical marijuana being viable enough. So we want to teach them and teach the physicians and educate not only the physicians, but the patients themselves. Accountability is really important. The responsibility of the use, understanding the levels of THC, understanding what the drug does, and how it affects you in your body. And I know you guys got questions, and I ask that you hold it until the end so that you really can get the information and the information of what has happened now that Rick Scott has signed a new law. So we really want to know, how can we be involved in that? And that's why Patients with Patients of America is just so gung-ho about getting this done.
Awesome. Thank you, Melanie. Can you share with them when I first started speaking to Melanie about cannabis and how her organization fits into a specific need in the cannabis industry for strong patient advocates who protect the patient experience, she shared with me a story for one of her clients for her organization, and this is an individual with sickle cell, and this individual had went into the hospital and then tested positive for having THC. So can you share that experience with our group, so just so they have a better idea of the type of advocacy you do for customers in the cannabis space?
So as we said in the beginning, we cater to all chronic illnesses. However, our flagship disease is sickle cell anemia. Being that I have it and I see, you know, in each county, running from all the way from Monroe to Miami-Dade County, Broward, all the way up to Port St. Lucie and the Treasure Coast, we see that there is a need and an issue for a need for education when it comes on to medical marijuana. So I had a patient, unfortunately, she was maybe 18. She had about hip replacement surgeries already. What sickle cell is it's a blood disorder where your blood cells some are shaped around like a normal cell, and then some are shaped like a half moon. And those half moon shaped cells clump together in the vein, and they cause extreme pain, and it can last for a day, sometimes 2 days. What we call is the hemoglobin level. It's a normal level is over 10. And in someone that doesn't have the disease, but in a patient that does have sickle cell, they can drop up to a low level of maybe 6 or 7, which maybe they require blood transfusion or excess.
And that's the crisis. That's when crisis, and they would probably go to the hospital.
So crisis, we call crisis meaning pain. That means we refer to it as a crisis because there's a danger zone that's happening in that blood, in those blood cells. So with a high level of pain of let's say 10 or 9, they have to give some type of pain medication. And the only treatment is pain medication and fluids to flush out those cells. So my patient, she went into the hospital. I won't say what hospital it is because we don't want to give you.
Right, absolutely.
But,
let's keep it anonymous.
Let's keep it anonymous. But she went into the hospital, and her mom, you know, decided that marijuana works for her. She notices when she gives it to her daughter, she is not complaining so much of the pain. It's relieving her pain. So the mom, and this is before.
This is prior to
Amendment 2. So the daughter goes in for treatment. She's at a high level of pain. She's crying immensely. And they do blood work. When they come in, they triage you. They do the blood work. What happened to this patient is as she gets into the triage and they do her blood work, they saw that she had high levels of THC in her system. So the nurse came over to her and, do you smoke? And she says, so, the child didn't want to give the wrong answer. So because she was 17, 18, she kind of made an excuse like, oh, well, I went to a party last night. They eventually said to her that they did not want to give her any narcotics to treat her sickle cell pain because of the high levels of THC. Now, it is unfair to not treat the patient with what is necessary to abate the pain and get that pain level of 10 to a 2 or a 3 or 4. And the doctor, it's his license, and he can make any decision when it comes on to prescribing medication. So if he chooses to write something like a low dose Tylenol or an Advil, that's not going to help a pain crisis of a 10 or 9. So what ended up happening to that patient is she became what they called in the community, in the healthcare community, as drug seeking. They also labeled her as not only she was a drug seeker, but they call it a red flag, where they red flag the patient, meaning that patient is now anywhere she goes, because all the hospital systems are connected. Any hospital that patient will go, she will not be able to receive any form of treatment when it relates to getting any narcotics to treat her pain, because of the fact that she has high levels of THC in her system. Now, instead of understanding that patient, the patient started crying. She was a part of another association, and the association got word that this patient was blackballed in the healthcare community and in the hospitals, and they dropped her as their flagship patient. They had her as one of the face,
like a spokesperson.
She was the face of sickle cell disease for that organization. They ended up dropping her. The mother was crying. Everybody was very upset because they didn't understand. What did I do so wrong? Right. All I did was try and find out what works for me. And that's why we advocate for what works for you as a patient. If you have MS, if you have lupus, if you have cancer, if you have HIV, whatever works for you is what you should use to ensure that you get the best management plan out of your disease so you can live an active life. So the patient called me and she said, Melanie, why did they put me on the red flag list? Why every hospital I go to, they treat me differently? And I explained to her, I said, you have high levels of THC in your system, and this is the reason why they have chosen to do this. Now, we don't force a doctor to do anything because it's his license, but they need to understand why they're making the decisions and how dangerous that can be for a patient with a chronic illness. If they don't get any formal treatment for that disease, they can go into a whole host of complications. Mm-hmm. Acute chest syndrome can start where they have pneumonia. They can die because they're not getting treated for the disease. And that is something that we want to avoid. We want to avoid fatalities. So that was an experience.
Thank you. And with that example, there are a lot of, educational touch points. So now we have Amendment 2. We have the new bill that went into effect that I'll go into detail about in just a moment. So we have to educate our patients as far as what they're allowed to do. They, there's some patients who thought as soon as the vote results came out for Amendment 2 that, okay, marijuana is legal, I can, get marijuana. No, there's a systematic approach to it, and we need to educate our patients on the fact that you need to find a qualifying physician who will make a recommendation, not a prescription, but a recommendation, and they'll send you to a dispensary of which these are your options, and these are the strains that are available. this is the dosage that your particular doctor is recommending, so that they're educated on how they can legally get access to marijuana. So that's one educational touch point. Another educational touch point is with the physicians. So we need physicians to understand that medical marijuana is an option that they can consider instead of opiates and narcotics. This is really important work as far as educating our physicians. There are some great physicians in our network who have done sessions for Florida Cannabis Coalitions, like Dr. Joseph Rosado. It's his birthday today, so if you know him personally, say happy birthday to Dr. Rosado. Dr. Michelle Weiner, Dr. Clint Potter, those are like some of my faves, as far as Dr. McKenzie down here in South Florida. Those are my favorite doctors in the space, that they're really focused on advocacy. They're really focused on educating their peer group, which includes other physicians. In addition to the physician education that needs to take place, we have to educate the hospitals and the places that deliver care. So we have, hospitals, hospice centers, assisted living facilities, and I even want to say the therapist community as well. So with hospitals, helping them understand that if someone is, is self-medicating with marijuana, or they're going through the legitimate legal means for getting access to marijuana, it's not fair to label them an addict. That needs to change. That stigma needs to change. Patients with patients is integral to that change happening in the culture. With their sit-down conversations, they are authorized by patients to discuss their medical records with the physician. Physicians like the fact that this advocacy exists because sometimes they have difficulty translating what their treatment plans to the patient, and then the advocate will come in and explain it to the patient. And then the patients, when they're like, no, I don't think that works for me, and the doctor's not getting it, the advocate will step in and try to explain it and make sure they come up with a solution that works best for the patient and that the doctor is comfortable with. In the hospital space, the challenge that we're facing that will, hopefully get relieved in the next session. I have some ideas, and I'll probably sit down with Melanie and some physicians and see if we can come up, and some advocacy groups come up with some recommended language as far as, how does a person in the hospital get their medical marijuana that has been working for them up until this point. How do we prevent them from, if they've weaned themselves off narcotics, from as soon as they go into the hospital, they get put on narcotics again. They get put on opiates. If you're, we have an opiate addiction issue across the country. So if someone's trying to avoid that opiate addiction issue, or they're sensitive to it, they're prone to it, and then they go into a hospital setting, that first time that they get opiates again, that may trigger their addiction, and they're back addicted to opiates. So we need to be very conscious of that, especially when someone's in the hospital. Understanding decision makers. So when you have the elderly community and their family members who are making decisions for them when they're in a hospital setting, or they can't make decisions for themselves, understanding that medical marijuana is an option. So there are a lot of educational touch points that I think we can do a better job at rising awareness about, especially in our upcoming legislation with the next session. So those are just things we want to talk about and help you understand the organization Patients with Patients, what they're fighting for. I don't really know of any other advocacy organizations in this space that's specific to we just deal with patients and the patient experience. There's a lot of focus on patient access, but there isn't really a lot of focus on the patient experience and those stopping points that legislators haven't thought of yet, which is, I'm in the hospital, what happens? They're like, I don't, we haven't written about that yet. Well, let's get to the point where we're writing about what happens when you're in the hospital, what happens when you're in an assisted living facility. I've spoken to Dr. Weiner about, some of my thoughts as far as like assisted living facilities and and how we can evangelize with them about even allowing CBD. So CBD is legal. So you don't need a recommendation for CBD. Most of you who know me, you'll know that I distribute for Green Road CBD. It's the only pharmacist formulated and compounded CBD product that's currently on the market. It has 0% THC, which helps with patients with fall risks where medical marijuana may not be an option because, you know, they're elderly, they may have Alzheimer's, and they may have a fall risk. CBD is a great option. Well, how do we get that type of product into our assisted living facilities? So those are some things that we're talking through currently. So I'm going to segue to a little historical information. Let's talk about where we are currently as far as legislation in the state of Florida where medical marijuana is concerned. So I'm going to take you back to 2014. We had a constitutional amendment on the ballot. That constitutional amendment failed by 2 percentage points. It was disappointing, but it was still a victory in the sense that it made the legislators decide they were going to come out with the Compassionate Use Act. The Compassionate Use Act allowed for medical marijuana. It was low THC medical marijuana, so it's mostly a CBD product. Less than 0.8% THC is what was pretty much qualifying at that time for medical marijuana, and it set up the organization for dispensaries and such. So there was an application season. There were 5 dispensaries that were identified, and then there were 2 added as a result of litigation. So now we have seven dispensaries or dispensing organizations, that was the title at the time, that are in existence currently, and you're starting to see them pop up in different areas across the state. There were 2 changes to the Compassionate Use Act made in 2016. One was to allocate a license for the Black Farmers Organization, and the second one was to have the Right to Try Act, which allowed full THC marijuana to be given to people who were terminally ill. Okay, so those are 2 changes that happened. After that, we have November, we passed at a whopping 71.3% Amendment 2, and that's a huge victory for patients across the state. With Amendment 2, there was a need to put rules in place, put law in place, and we went into a legislative session quickly after. Committee started in December. I know Minorities for Medical Marijuana founder Roz McCarthy and Chair Eric Range, myself, we were up in Tallahassee from December pretty much every week until the end of session. So more them than me. I only went a couple times, but they were up there definitely every week. So with their being in session, the hope was that we would get a strong, patient-friendly bill out of the legislation, out of the session. The session ended, and there was a lot of disappointment that we didn't end the session with a bill. I think one of the main things that came out of the session is the education of our legislators, because I think going into session, many of them didn't think that the big issue for the session would be medical marijuana. They just thought it would be one of many things they looked at, and they weren't giving it the weight that it probably deserved at first. And then when they saw all the advocacy and all the lobbying dollars, the lines at the public hearings that were put on by the Department of Health, lines of patients, lines of physicians, rejecting the proposed rules from the Department of Health, mandating, requiring, demanding that the rules from the Department of Health be consistent with Amendment 2 and things that were allowed by Amendment 2, such as edibles and smoking, and trying to expand the diseases, the illnesses that were covered by our medical marijuana law. Well, once after the disappointment with session ending, there was a lot of advocacy groups who got involved and demanded a special session. I have a radio show every Sunday from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., Cannabis Life Radio. You can find it on Facebook by liking Cannabis Life. It's a great show. I do it with Arby Barroso and Leon Hamilton, and it's sponsored by Green Roads World. And we talk about these types of issues. So I was on Cannabis Life Radio saying, we're not going to get a special session because every decision that they make is due to money, and it's going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars to bring all the legislators back to Tallahassee. It's not going to happen. That was my prediction. And I was wrong. They stepped up. The governor agreed. They had a special session to talk about budgetary issues. At first, the medical marijuana wasn't even on the agenda for that, but eventually it got added to the agenda. So, you know, some of the advocacy groups really had a rally in Orlando, outside the Department of Health in Orlando, demanding a special session, and it actually happened. When we had the special session, which was only a few weeks ago, they did add medical marijuana to the agenda, and they did ultimately create a medical marijuana bill. Some people like it, some people don't like it. You know, I think it's progress, but there's definitely opportunities to change some things. I think we, you know, probably will see some lawsuits as a result of it not being perceived as being very close to the requirements of the constitutional amendment, but time will tell what that all looks like. So what I'd like to do is kind of talk you through some of the key points of the bill. I'd like to take questions from people as well, and Melanie's also here to take questions. But high level, just talking about, you know, what are the illnesses? So as a patient, how do I know if I qualify? So we have HIV and AIDS. HIV is considered separate from AIDS. We have Crohn's disease on the list, multiple sclerosis, post-traumatic stress disorder, epilepsy, Parkinson's, glaucoma, cancer, and ALS. So, you know, HIV and AIDS, that's, you know, definitely necessary. They experience a lot of pain. We're seeing across the country where a lot of the legislation for other states include HIV and AIDS. It's pretty consistent that we'll see the presence of HIV and AIDS on this legislation. Crohn's disease as well, multiple sclerosis. You know, with multiple sclerosis, I think the symptoms that present themselves are the spasms. So they, you know, with the muscle spasms, a lot of times that is consistent with multiple sclerosis. There are physicians who inquire about, well, my patient has muscle spasms similar to someone with multiple sclerosis, but, you know, would they qualify? You know, that's a decision that needs to be made by the physicians on a case-by-case basis as far as what they think what their diagnosis is and whether they believe their patient qualifies. The Florida Board of Medicine has been identified as a guiding force on some of those directions. It's highlighted as a decision maker in this current legislation, as well as the previous proposed rules by the Department of Health. Post-traumatic stress disorder is, again, seen consistently across the country. It's really important. I think it's one group that really fights for the inclusion of traumatic disorder would be our veterans, those that serve and protect us, those who've, you know, been into war. They've seen horrific things. They've experienced things. They've been under a lot of stress. You know, victims of sexual trauma have post-traumatic stress disorders. You know, even victims of police brutality have post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's so many things that fall in that category. And physicians are identified as the individuals who will determine whether that is qualifying the level of post-traumatic stress experience. One thing that I would like to see is some type of inclusion of the therapist community in conversations about post-traumatic stress disorder and medical marijuana. The recommending physicians have to be MDs or DOs at this time. But how do we reach and touch the therapist community? How do we create these mutual referral situations with the therapist community? We need to educate. We need courses for people in therapy, letting them know that if you have a post-traumatic stress disorder client or patient that you're seeing, think about discussing seeing a regular physician, an MD or a DO, to talk about medical marijuana as an option. I think that's the right thing to do. Also, with the therapist community, making sure that they know they have a relationship with physicians, where when a physician identifies a post-traumatic stress disorder case and they're recommending medical marijuana, that the next step is to maybe identify if there's a therapy need as well. And then combining the therapy with the medication of medical marijuana together in resolving the issues for those patients. Again, I'm not a physician, so I'm not giving any type of physician-related advice, but you know, not even as a lawyer, but as a person, as you know, a patient myself, I recommend that there be some type of correlation or cross-communication, integration of the therapy experience with the recommending of medical marijuana experience. And I think it's extremely, extremely important for our veterans. I remember when I went to first interview Dr. Rosado, the first time I met Dr. Rosado in his Orlando office, there was a young lady there, and I probably spoke about her on the last webinar, but there was a young lady there who she's a veteran, and she has post-traumatic stress disorder. She had been self-medicating for years. She cannot work unless she is medicated with medical marijuana. She doesn't leave the house unless she's medicated with medical marijuana. She had a severe traumatic experience or series of experiences when she was overseas in the Middle East. And medical marijuana is the thing that helps her get past that, have something close to a normal life. For a patient like that, you know, Amendment 2 is a huge victory. When I spoke to her and interviewed her, she was actually crying and saying she's just so happy that she could be on the list, even knowing at that time that she had to wait 90 days before we can give her the medical marijuana. It was just the recognition that for people like her, that there's nothing wrong with her. She just needs a little bit of assistance. She just needs the right type of medicine for her to reintegrate into the community overall. And she wants to contribute to society. She served her country and she wants to continue to serve as a citizen, but her fears and her post-traumatic stress keep her from being the best that she can be. And I was really glad to experience that with her and hear her story. And when you hear those real life stories, it makes the work that we do even more important. And that's why we, you know, on a Saturday, we you know, want to share and educate and things like that, because if it'll help another patient like this young lady that I'm speaking of, then it's all worth it. And that's really why us advocates, groups such as Patients with Patients, that's why we do what we do, because it's easy to high level look at, oh, these are the scenarios that we're thinking about as legislators, et cetera, and so on. But you really need to think there are some deviants from that. We need to give physicians the flexibility for that case that doesn't fit into these cookie cutter spaces, and allow them as doctors. We trust them to give morphine. We trust them to give oxy. We trust them to give all, you know, the Percocets. Let's empower them and trust them to make these decisions with medical marijuana, which again has a 0% fatality rate and doesn't have the same abuse pattern that we're seeing with the opiates.
With the
Yes.
Touching on PTSD, it's important to know that Patients with Patients, you know, a lot of advocacy programs and a lot of physicians, they will go ahead and they diagnose the disease, whatever the disease may be. But there is a psychosocial that sometimes is not done. So you don't know if the patient is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is why even when we get patients, we have a licensed nurse or a licensed social worker do a psychosocial on that patient to on intake, so we know, you know, maybe they do need more than just treatment and management on that side, but maybe they need a mental health specialist. Maybe they do need medical marijuana to assist them with that. And this is why it's very frustrating for advocates when we see that, you know, it's easy to just diagnose me with something, but it's not so easy to know what's going on the inside. And I may look happy, I may look like nothing's wrong, but sometimes patients are truly going through a lot of mental health issues that we may not even know, caused by that chronic illness that they have, or caused by a traumatic experience. So it's extremely, extremely important to know what is the issue, find out what that issue is, then be referred to a physician, and a physician that is also compassionate. I say pairing, a patient with a physician is something that is the most difficult thing, because if you don't have that relationship, the physician is just going to do what they have to do. They have 300 or 400 patients, and you're one out of many. And so to stand out and make sure that your voice is heard, and our whole focus is empowerment and turning you into that advocate so you can speak for yourself. We don't want to just speak for you for the rest of your life. We want you to eventually speak for yourself. And, with these labeled diseases as, okay, this is what needs it, we're so concerned as advocates as, okay, so what happens to the rest of the people that may need it? What happens to the diseases that, you haven't even thought about possible, medical marijuana as an option because, oh, they don't need it, and it's looked over. And that is the main focus of why we pound pavement on this, because we don't want anyone to be left behind. There's so many people across this country that need help, so many people around the world that need help. And if I have the access and I have the knowledge, why can't I help you figure that out? And so with, I can just tell you one experience. I have a cousin, and he's a Marine. And at the time that 9/11 happened, he had to go back to Iraq. And he himself will not admit that he has PTSD. He will not admit and say to anybody that he has it. And even though they offer services in the military and the veteran services, and even, if you're a firefighter and you see a lot of traumatic things, I have a brother who's a firefighter. He has seen a child literally in the street from a car accident, and the child's head was cracked open. And for him, he has a daughter. So it touched him. Traumatically, he dealt with that on the inside without going to someone to say, you know what, this really bothered me. But he said to me as his sister, Mel, I held my daughter for the next, she had to sleep with me for the next 3 months, 4 months before I was able to even, think about having her go back into her bed, just because of what I experienced. So the services are out there, but if somebody's not there to really identify and relate to that patient and relate to even just normal people, 9/11 was so many people, or even just watching on the TV gave us a traumatic experience. And for that very reason, sometimes you need a little extra counseling. And as a Marine, you go into seeing people's head blown off. You see all these things, and you come home to a normal life. And that normal life sometimes is not so normal for you. So, you may need it. And it's important to seek what is going to work for you. And if medical marijuana is it, we are going to ensure that you get it, because it's not fair for one disease to have it, and then it's not that important for them because they don't need it and they have all these other things. Narcotics are so highly addictive. Your brain receptors are altered severely by narcotics. And, yes, it's needed in some instances, but then there's other instances that the abuse is so heavy, the patient themselves can't turn back. There's no detox process. There's no... And
there are also the side effects. Effects. A lot of times when people are comparing narcotics or opiates to medical marijuana, they're not comparing the side effects of opiates. We talk a lot about the addiction, and that's a huge, huge issue, but we don't talk about the side effects of opiates compared to the fact that medical marijuana really doesn't have side effects, or, again, there are a few, exhaustion maybe, and things like that. But just comparing them apples to apples. Thank you for that, Melanie. I want you to talk about your intake process in a little bit. I'm just going to keep going through these illnesses. So epilepsy, you know, we've seen the videos on Facebook. We know that mid-seizure, you can administer medical marijuana and someone will stop seizing. I've met enough people since I've been in this industry where they're like, thanks for what you do because I lost my sister at 21 years old because she had a seizure. That shouldn't be, you know, that really, and in these times, knowing that we have the medicine that can help with that, we need to make sure we're not criminalizing these patients. I recently joined a minority law firm. Michael Minardi is, you know, he's a superhero when it comes to fighting for patient rights, for fighting for patient access, for making sure we're not criminalizing our patients. You know, it's really important that we allow, we evangelize that these patients are not criminals. Because when you hear, all you can say when you hear about, you know, a 21-year-old young woman with her life ahead of her dying from an epileptic seizure because she couldn't get access to medical marijuana, I mean, what do you say? Sorry. So that's a victory that it is included in the state of Florida as a legal way that you can get access to medical marijuana. So if you are epileptic, if you know people are epileptic, have them see their physician so their physician can make a determination as to whether this would be the right medicine for them. Same with Parkinson's. We hear stories of people with Parkinson's where once they get medical marijuana, they, you know, like I've heard of one couple where the wife had Parkinson's and she said, thank you so much. I haven't slept in the same bed with my husband in years because I was always shaking. So we couldn't sleep in the same bed together. Now that I have medical marijuana, I can sleep in the bed with my husband. That's the story that that I was told. Or you know, the first time that someone could actually understand what they were saying was after, in years, was after they had medical marijuana. Glaucoma, that's always the go-to for opposition, to say, haha, you know, now everybody's going to have glaucoma, but it works. It works for vision issues. There's like a degenerative vision issue as well that I have clients from my CBD business, and they're using CBD only in order to improve their vision. And their eye physician is saying, whatever you're doing, keep doing it because it works. So there's glaucoma, but there are other vision issues that can be helped with medical marijuana. And that's something that we're going to advocate for. Cancer, we have, you know, a lot of anecdotal information as far as tumors being broken up, tumors, you know, tumors going away or shrinking in size, et cetera, and so on. So for cancer, it's really important. Another reason it's important for cancer patients is their appetite. When they're, you know, when they lose their appetite, medical marijuana helps with their appetite. You know, it's just, you know, helping them go through the nausea associated with chemotherapy, even if they are going to choose chemotherapy. Or their physician chooses chemotherapy with them. Doctors are now starting to add medical marijuana as part of that regimen so that it will ease the nausea associated with it and make them eat so they can have a better chance of making it through chemo and going back to their regular lives. And then finally, ALS is a disease. We did the ALS challenge with all the buckets of water. That's another illness that is recognized. But, you know, what's more important to us as we sit here are what's not included. So what's not included? So some of the key things that we are going to fight for in the next session and fight for in the next constitutional amendment, we have Regulate Florida. They're circulating a petition right now, 4-page petition. Wherever you see them, make sure that you've at least completed one because we need 1 million for it to go on the ballot. You know, we want to make sure that chronic pain is recognized. In this new bill, it does talk a little bit about chronic pain, but as it relates to one of the enumerated recognized illnesses in the law. So it's not just chronic pain, or as your doctor determines chronic pain, which is affecting your health. It has to be related to one of the illnesses listed. So that's something that we're going to fight. You're going to see us fighting in the future to get chronic pain included, like in other states. Sickle cell anemia, you know, again, Melanie mentioned that she you know, is a survivor, and she's living with sickle cell as she educates it. That's why she can relate to her patients. But sickle cell anemia should absolutely be on this list. I'm extremely passionate about this issue for a number of reasons. One, sickle cell anemia disproportionately affects the African American community. And the African American community is often overlooked when people are creating legislation. So, you know, myself as, you know, being a bit of an influencer in the space, I'm going to, you know, speak up about sickle cell. Sickle cell needs to be on the list. You see states like Texas, other states have included on their list, or they have it included in their bills. Why is that not happening in Florida? The sickle cell absolutely needs to be one of the illnesses included. Roz McCarthy, who's the founder and president of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, her son has sickle cell, and you know, there's a lot of activity surrounded that. Blood transfusions. He's a college student. He's doing well at Florida A&M University, and you know, that's why she's so passionate about it. And I've seen her experience because, you know, sometimes we're driving to Tallahassee together, and I'm hearing her conversations with her son, and there's no reason why he can't legally get access to something that would help him in his experience. And also there's some insomnia issues that a lot of people are taking marijuana illegally, but it should be legally for sleep issues. And you know, sleep affects so many other functions in your body. It affects your emotional state. You're being depressed, and you know, I'm speaking anecdotally, not as a physician, but we definitely have to recognize the sleep issues. So, you know, I just wanted to go through, you know, that list of illnesses so that you can, if you are a patient, you can see, is this one of the illnesses that I have? And then doctors are empowered to, if there's a similar issue, then they can also recommend based on you having something that is similar with symptomatically to these particular illnesses. So let's talk about this, the bill. So Senate Bill 8A passed through special session, as I mentioned. It was signed into law yesterday by Governor Scott. So that's great. We have a bill. On the 16th, the Department of Health released their rules, which are basically refer a lot to this particular bill that was pending at the time, but now is law. Main victory from this law, from this bill, is the removal of the 90-day relationship rule. So that was a really, it was a hard pill to swallow for a long time. Sorry, my neck is bothering me. It was a hard pill to swallow for a long time because, you know, we were getting in the middle of the doctor-patient relationship. Physicians could prescribe other medications without going through a 90-day relationship period. It was just for medical marijuana, there was this extra layer, they call layer of protection, but an extra interference. Well, with this bill, they no longer have the 90-day relationship rule. So you don't have to have a 90-day relationship with your physician. We are, again, trusting our physicians to make medical decisions, which they went to medical school for. So that's really important. You do have to be a resident to qualify for this, for medical marijuana. So how do you prove your residency? According to the bill, you can show your driver's license and you prove that you're a resident. If you happen to be a seasonal resident and you don't have your driver's license, then there are a list of things you can show, 2 of those things, and then you'll be able to be qualified by the department. When they say the department, they mean the Department of Health, as a resident. So, you know, a mortgage deed, or you know, your deed or your mortgage note, or utility bills, and there's a list of things that would qualify you as a resident, and you can see that on the Department of Health page. Caregivers rule. So caregivers are really important to this process. Caregivers are only allowed to have 1 patient, and there are a few exceptions. So across the country, there are caregivers who are allowed to grow medical marijuana. There are caregivers who are allowed to have 4 or 5 patients that they support. In some markets, it's a business opportunity for some, where they're like, I'll be a caretaker for this many patients. I will charge them such and such amount. I'll take them to their appointments. I'll help them learn how to cook edibles. I'll do, you know, a variety of services that they provide to the medical marijuana recipient. In our state, it's very different. The caregivers can, again, only have one patient unless, the patient is a minor, and both their parents need to be caregivers, or they're in like a hospice situation or assisted living situation, and they need a number of people to be their caregivers. Also disabled people who are mentally challenged, et cetera, and so on, they would have the ability to have multiple, if they have different guardians or they have their parents, then they would be able to have more than the one-to-one relationship. But the rule of thumb is the one-to-one relationship, where it's one caregiver for one patient. The caregiver has to be 21 years. So that's really important. So in order to be a caregiver, you have to be 21 years of age. And you also have to pass a background check. So a caregiver has to pass like a level check in order to provide this service. In addition to that, I'm trying to think if there's anything that would be pretty important about the caregiver. 21 years old, have to pass a background check. They need to have their caregiver card on them every time they're in possession of the medical marijuana for their patient. So there's more, but I'm just giving high level details. And again, this isn't legal advice. This is just kind of talking through some of the things that you can read in Bill, highlighting some things you can read in Bill 8A. Other things that are of interest to patients is that the maximum supply that you can have of medical marijuana is a 70-day supply. So that's reasonable dosage for 70 days. And that's the maximum. There are exceptions, like a physician can request an exception, and then the Department of Health will give them feedback on that in like 21 days. Sorry, you're switching. Within, I think it's 14 days that they have to respond as far as whether that exception has been granted. Every patient that participates has to sign an informed consent form, and that is a standard form that's going to be created by I believe it's the Florida Board of Medicine or the Department of Health. So there is going to be a standard informed consent form for everyone to sign. Other things that patients ask about have to do with what goes into the registry. So the registry is, and I think there are going to, some people are going to challenge, or I've heard people talking about challenging for, HIPAA compliance. I think there's definitely a need for a HIPAA compliance review of this entire process. I think it would behoove the state to do some assessments around that. No doubt there will probably be some court cases emerging as far as HIPAA compliance. In the registry contains physician information. It also includes patient information. The patient's name is put into the registry. Their dosage that they are permitted by the doctor is entered, and their illness is entered into the registry. So that's entered in compassionate use registry. I say that definitely not to discourage anyone from getting involved. Of course, there's limited access to the registry. Not everyone can see all the information that's entered into the registry, but I think you should just be informed and know that those are the requirements by law that have to be entered into the registry. The one thing that's highlighted is for pregnancy. The physician is required to verify pregnancy status for women when it comes to the compassionate use registry and being recommended medical marijuana. If someone is identified as pregnant, then they will only be allowed to have low THC medical marijuana, not the full strength medical marijuana for obvious reasons. And I'm thinking one of the most rational reasons is there's not enough known yet about what the effect would be on a fetus. So that is a requirement. So don't be alarmed if you are a woman and you go see your physician and they want to verify your pregnancy status prior to recommending. Also, as far as physicians evaluating, every 30 weeks, there would be an evaluation of every 30 weeks, your doctor would have to see you again and reevaluate whether you need to continue on the registry, whether you need to be taken off the registry. So when you go to a physician to see them about being recommended medical marijuana, you should know that it has to be a physical exam. So in the prior environment, there was a there was the question of telemedicine. So there are pros and there are cons. Pro telemedicine is some people just can't get to a doctor. Some people are sick and shut in. What about people in on hospice and things like that? So or not hospice, maybe like in facilities where they can't get out as easily. There was always the telemedicine question. I know the Florida Board of Medicine has considered that question. The Florida Board of Medicine is meeting in Miami on August 4th. So if you have an opinion on how they make decisions around medical marijuana, feel free to join them at their meeting. I think it's Friday, August 4th in Miami. So join the Florida Board of Medicine, because they are listed as a more than just an administrative group, but they're listed as a decision maker and opinion giver where this is concerned. So you do need to have a physical examination with your doctor, and telemedicine is not permitted. Okay, the registry information. This is a question that I get a lot of the time. It is available to law enforcement. The rationale behind that is they need to know what dose you've been recommended and what form you've been recommended, so they can do their job. So I just wanted to let you know that it is available to law enforcement. There are repercussions for falsifying information. So you want to make sure they can revoke your status as a recipient of medical marijuana. So you want to make sure that all the information you're giving is completely honest, so that you don't have any issues with, revocation or fines or penalties. As far as physicians, to be a qualifying physician, because some of you may say, hey, well, I'm just going to go to my doctor and say, I think I need medical marijuana. Well, your physician has to be qualified to recommend. As I mentioned, the eligible types of physicians are MDs and DOs. I've gotten requests, from, holistic doctors, why can't we do it? Or nurse practitioners. But at this point, it's the MDs and the DOs who are permitted to recommend. They have to take a 2-hour class. So they take a 2-hour course. It used to be 8 hours. So now it's only 2 hours. And then the maximum that that class can cost is $500, which again, it used to be $800. So it's great that that's been reduced. Just some background on that. One thing that we would like to see from many standpoints is the patient count increase to reflect the true need in Florida. So it benefits everyone. Patient count will increase when doctors start recommending. So doctors who are the gatekeepers of the process, it depends, chicken or the egg, which comes first. Patients also are the gatekeeper of the process. So a patient needs to be educated to know what their options are and look at medical marijuana as a reasonable option if they have one of the qualifying medical conditions. But then physicians need to be informed and encouraged to recommend marijuana if marijuana is the best type of medicine for their particular patient. Some physicians are hesitant, or they think it's too new. I think the 2-hour course requirement should help make more physicians feel more comfortable and want to dedicate that time to have that, even if they don't intend to use it at first, but at least let's get them qualified so that if they do have that patient walk in, that patient can walk out with the right recommendation for their particular illness. So that's that as far as the physician changes, the changes related to physicians.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So if I'm a patient and my physician is not really
in favor of it,
mm-hmm. do you recommend?
That's a really good question. I've had, I have a friend that I discussed this with, and he has Parkinson's, and he's like, gosh, every time I try to talk to one of my doctors about it, and he's, you know, a little bit older in age, he's like, every time I try to talk to my doctor about it, I hit a brick wall. And I see all the videos, I see how it's helping people, I want to try it. And I said, well, you know, I can't tell you whether it will work for you or not, but what I can do is give you, you know, a few physicians that I know that do recommend, but they also are comfortable, you know, they are also are familiar with Parkinson's, your illness, and they're familiar with pain management, et cetera, and so on. So I gave information for one of my preferred physicians, preferred because they are experts in the field and they're very knowledgeable. However, there is the Compassionate Use Registry of recommending physicians is updated every Friday. So that list is updated every week. So you can just go on the Department of Health Compassionate Use site, and then they'll have a list of all of the current physicians who can recommend, and then you can just find one in your particular area, and then they'll recommend for you. Okay, that's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome.
That's very important.
It's critical at this point. So those are like my high level notes. The new legislation has some changes related to, you know, dispensaries, just high level, because that's not the purpose of this call, but it does speak to patient access. There will be issued 10 additional dispensary organizations. There are additional requirements for how those individuals will qualify, and there will be an application process. They have also limited the number of dispensaries for each you know, formerly called dispensing organization, now called MMTC, to 25 locations per license. And then within regions, there'll be a maximum as well. You know, I see it as a good news story that one, it'll open up the market more. So when they hit the 25, then you get a new entrant with new ideas who may have different strains to kind of get into the business. So there'll be more variety for the patients. 25 is a good number. So we you know, if we see, you know, 17 organizations after MMTCs after they add the 10 with 25 locations, that's, you know, I think it's like 425, somewhere around there, locations that we'll have in the state that will be able to recommend medical marijuana. So that's really a huge victory for patient access. So instead of there only being 7, which with a few popping up here and there, we're going to have a 17 with the maximum of 25, but they'll be placed all throughout the state. One thing that we also fight for is making sure that rural areas, rural communities have dispensaries close to them. Urban communities where, you know, it's like, you know, the grandma in a urban community, that she can have access to a dispensary where she works, lives, plays, wherever. So I think with them putting maximums or setting numbers for regions, they won't all be like in downtown Miami or the fun areas. We'll have like the rural communities where someone is sick and they can benefit, they'll have access to it. You know, the Alachua counties and, you know, places like that, St. John's counties, et cetera, and so on, where we don't think about it, especially I'm a South Floridian, you know, we just don't think about those areas, but they need access to medicine too. So I think that'll be fantastic. So more stuff on dispensaries. I think we have a couple questions here. Dr. Sucherman, you were asking about, I'm a physician, when will the shortened 2-hour course be available and how do I register? I don't have an answer for that. It just got signed into law yesterday, and I really expect that we will see quickly, because the Department of Health has preparation for this. Because the 2-hour requirement was actually first recommended during session, the reduction from 8 to 2, it just didn't pass then. And then it passed during special session about, you know, 3 weeks ago. And then now that it's been signed into law, it's not like they had no clue, and it was, you know, they've had time to prepare. I think they'll be revising their procedures, including putting an application out and letting us know when those courses will be available. The revised 2-hour class with the revised pricing of $500. And they couldn't release it before yesterday. And that was the main question. You're welcome, Dr. Sucherman. So I'm going to kind of turn it back to Melanie so she can talk about intake for patients with patients. So again, this organization is about being that bridge between the patient and their caregivers, but not disrupting that relationship. So it's just like more of a translation, but not interrupting what the intent is from one party to the other. So when they're speaking a different language, when a patient is not getting what a doctor's saying, or a doctor's not hearing what the patient has to say, that advocate kind of steps in with the patient's consent and tries to ask the right questions and structure a relationship that will work long term for a healthier person. And that's the objective, is a healthier person with a longer life, better quality of life. So Melanie, I'm going to hand off to you so you can talk about how does someone access your services or anything similar that you think would be beneficial.
So with patients, thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah.
That was exceptional information, because I know that there's a lot of the patients and even the physicians that don't know where to go just to, it's so unfortunate, but we don't have a universal platform that gives us information like it gives about any other drug or any other medication out there. You can see commercials all over the place about every medication to treat every symptom, but unfortunately we don't have the access to the medical marijuana and figuring out how to navigate ourselves through. So with patients, and it's such a blessing that we have Scheril as our general counsel, because so many patients say to me, well, Melanie, what do I do? I need access to it. I need to make sure that I'm not in a situation where I have marijuana on me and I'm not getting it legally. How do I get it the legal way? And even minorities for medical marijuana is so important, because they allow you to have now the opportunity to be heard, as a minority, understanding how to get it, how to use it properly, how much can you get, and what should you be using disease, and all of those things are very, very important. So with Patients of America, our main focus is to try and assist those patients. And the first part of how you would sign on is usually you get referred. We get referrals from other patients who say, I've used this person, this person's my lead advocate, she's really good, and maybe you should talk to her too if your friend or a family member notices that you're having some issues within managing and coping with your disease. Or we have a physician registry where the physician can either go on our website. There's a link on our website on Patients with Patients. So it's PATIENCE with patients.org. And the physicians can click right on find an advocate and refer a patient, and it goes straight to our email. They refer a patient and we're able to contact that patient, speak to them. We actually also go into the hospital, and sometimes, the physician will say, this is a good person that you should talk to help you cope with after you're finished with your hospital stay. And the intake process, first, we have to practice our HIPAA laws. So we have to make sure that the patient completely is okay with us talking to their physician about their disease and about their healthcare, issues. And so we let them sign a consent form. They sign a patient consent form. Then they meet with a licensed nurse. One of our licensed nurses will do a psychosocial on them, finding out what their history is, what their history when it comes on to their disease, what type of disease they have. There's various types. Some people, you don't realize that every disease attacks the patient specifically in a different way. Mm-hmm. Just because I have HIV or just because I have AIDS or cancer, it doesn't mean that I have the same cancer that's in your body. It's attacking me differently. It's responding to my body chemistry differently. So it is important for us to do a full intake process of talking to that patient and seeing what the nature of their disease. What's your norm? You know, what happens? What are your symptoms? How do you counteract those symptoms? Are you doing it correctly? Are you just ignoring it, or are you really, you know, talking to your physician? Do you have that open line of communication? So we do that psychosocial. It finds out A to Z about the patient, talking about their history, their family history. Does mom and dad have diabetes? Does mom and dad have heart disease? Is there any complications or any other diseases running from grandma or grandpa? What runs in the family? So we also need to know, is there a history of addiction in that family? Maybe, you know, there's substance abuse issues in that family. You know, is there any other requirements of any of your other family members that may, you know, have an illness and they need medical marijuana and they don't know what to do, so they're doing it illegally? You know, all of those things we as an advocacy program need to understand, because what happens in the minority community is they just pass on a little weed here and a little weed here. And they all, either they're suffering from something and don't realize that it really is helping them, but what they're doing is they're just passing it along, like, you know.
And we can't do the studies. I think that's the hardest part, is because, you know, a lot of the illnesses, and let's highlight sickle cell that affects minority communities. And as Melanie indicated, different illnesses affect different people in a different way. But then we're finding, and I know Nova University's working on a study where, you know, breast cancer affects African American women different than it affects you know, white women and other ethnic groups. So you know, these illnesses, it can't be a cookie cutter approach, and we need to be able to get the studies and understand, matching the variety as far as the illness base with the variety with strains, and the variety in frequency, and the variety in dosage, and really document what's happening so that we can fine tune and automatically match people with what's going to work for them. There's a app that I've been looking at. What is it? I can't remember the name of that. I think it's Nalytics, with like Knalytics. I've seen them at, you know, tabling at the SEC conference and tabling in New York when I was there last week. And what they do is they test, the app measures the efficacy of your marijuana. So we need to be smarter about it. So we're past the point where it's like, all right, yeah, we just weed, marijuana makes me feel better. No, we have to get past that so we can really be specific. The industry is maturing. It's very sophisticated. The strains do make a difference. The concentrations make all the difference. So what this app does, which I'm looking at partnering with them in some way in the future, is they you list your symptoms, and then you get recommended medical marijuana, or, you know, in some states it's recreational, so you just get on your own, and then you track how your symptoms after you get it. Like if you were having pain, you know, every 4 hours before, are you still getting pain every 4 hours? You know, there's, you know, even like smiley face, and, you know, how much pain are you in right now? So you can see over time that your pain is reducing in frequency and in degree. And then you have that, so you can take that data to your physician and say, this is what's happened since I started taking medical marijuana, or black market marijuana, if that's, you know, the situation that you're in. Not that I'm encouraging that, but if you're a sickle cell person who is not legal here, and you're self-medicating, not that that's legal or encouraged, well, still keep track of your data. So by legalizing the illnesses and chronic pain, sickle cell, those types of illnesses, and starting to study the results, then we can save people's lives, and we can make people have better quality of life. And that's really what the objective is that we're driving towards. I am completely in support of the use of technology to get us there. And I think, you know, that's why I also encourage, come out of the cannabis closet. Let's bring this all above ground. Is the organization Women Above Ground, which is about diversity in cannabis. But I'm going to steal that tail end of of their name and say, let's bring this activity above ground. And how do we do that? It's through legalization and pushing for legalization, especially at the medical side. You know, if you disagree as far as recreational, fine, I get it, whatever. But when it comes to the medical space, we really need to understand. We have a lot of anecdotal information and data, but what we're missing are the actual studies. There's some really great studies about CBD where they're, you know, starting with mice and rats, and, you know, University of Miami is doing a concussion study with CBD where CBD is helping with that. And up in New Jersey, New York, they're doing an addiction study with CBD, and it's helping with that. So we need to be able to do that, and do it with CBD, do it with low THC, do it with, you know, different concentrations of medical marijuana and different strains, and really have be sophisticated in how we approach these illnesses and disease. So there's a lot of research opportunity. But I don't think the fact that there's a lot of research opportunity should limit our ability to help people now. So I don't want to give the opposition that as like a statement point as far as, well, yeah, she just said there's so much that we need to learn, so let's not do it. No. We know anecdotally from a great number of people that it works. So stop restricting access, give the patient access to what they need. Let's save some lives. Let's give better qualities of life. Even someone who is, you know, terminal, and terminal is defined in this legislation as imminent death within a 1 year period. Even someone who is terminal, they, you know, maybe marijuana won't save their life, or, you know, they won't live longer or whatever. But even though we have seen with a lot of illnesses, and I'll tell you another story about that, it has extended life and given people a new chance at life when their illness was found to be fatal. But even if it is terminal, you know, those memories that families are able to have with their loved ones, can't put a price on that. And we don't have the right to keep that from them. So if you want, like Dr. Rosado speaks about his patient Juju, like he was on our Cannabis Life radio show, and he was talking about Juju, the patient, 15-year-old cancer patient, had cancer of the face, the jaw, caused a little bit of disfiguration, and he wanted to put him on the list, but that was when the 90-day rule was in effect, and he couldn't put him on the list, but he started to register, etc. Then the Right to Try Act that I mentioned earlier came into effect, so he could give him the medical marijuana. And then, you know, the mom calls Dr. Rosana. He's like, you know, he's laughing. I haven't heard him laugh in years. Like, my son's laughing. Again, terminal ill patient, 15-year-old, and he's laughing. So yeah, people are like, oh, maybe he's high, whatever. But, you know, for a mother, when you know your kid they're saying your kid's gonna die, the fact that they're not like comatose with morphine, or just like he was on morphine, and there was no interaction with her son, to getting to the point where he's laughing, that's huge for that family. And those are the types of stories that we need to keep in the forefront of our minds as we're making decisions, as we're using lobbying dollars, as we're talking to our legislators, as we're writing proposed legislation, that let's not forget those stories.
And you know what frustrates me, you know, as an advocate, I'm sorry, but I get frustrated. Okay, very much so, because there is this thing that happens where the physician or the medical community feels like you need to be on the brink of death before they want to really prescribe something that can help. Now, I know that when you are in stage 4 cancer, and you know it's not so bad. Is stage 4 bad? You gotta remind me. I think sure. I don't know if it's stage 4 or stage 1. I don't know. But however, when you're close to passing away, they will give you morphine to make you comfortable. And you have all the access to medical marijuana. You have all the access to a host of medications, narcotics. And then you have someone who says, hey, this works for me. And I can actually live an active life and do things because I have, the access to medical marijuana. I have my license. I can, carry. I can have my little dispense of what I take during the day and what gets me through, and I'm still able to function normally as I would if I wasn't taking it, or if I wasn't going through all this pain. My question is, why would we just wait until you're, so far to the stage of almost dying to say, yes, now it's okay for you to use medical marijuana,
Right.
And that's that, as the advocate, that for me, that is disheartening because, we don't want you to just die. We
Right.
don't want you to be on the brink of death and just say, okay, now you can use it. And so, it's very important that we do what's necessary to get people back and up and doing what they want to do and having a successful life and meeting and attaining their goals. Because if we're just saying that it's viable for the ones who have a year to live or have 2 years to live, it then says that, oh, well, maybe you're not that concerned because they're almost going to die in another year anyway, and that's the way of thinking. Even if that's not the physician's standpoint, it's still the way of thinking for the general public. So,
sometimes just being alive isn't enough. Sometimes it's how you're living and the quality of life.
Exactly. And so, and I stress that, ensuring that you find a way to make sure that if okay, this is the type, and even as the app you said, that app last night, I'm going to share with you guys, my cousin called me and she said, Melanie, there's an app that you can use and it tells you, how it affects you and it tracks it. And she was extremely excited because these patients now, and she's a nurse, and for her to see that happening and to see that now the technology can really be influential on how we really gauge what happens when you are using medical marijuana. It's easier, even if you're not using it the right way, or you're not, it's not so-called legal, and you don't have your documentation. It's easier for you to approach your physician with that app and say, look, I did my documentation. That gives you credibility. That gives you credibility enough to say, you know what, I know that, doctor, it's not something that, you're ready to look at. You're not even ready to probably, bring the notion in to your practice. But look, I did some research and I started using this app, and I can really track my progression, and I see how I'm able to do a lot better than before. And, so what do you think? And maybe if you don't agree with it, let's see what it can do to see if I can even try to see if it helps me. Right.
And that helps to educate the doctors as well. If they get, because that happens a lot with the patients that we talk to. They're like, my doctor said, whatever I'm doing, keep doing. And then I had to tell them, well, I'm using medical marijuana, or I'm using marijuana, and that's what's helping me. So, that may be the turning point for that doctor, but also for all the rest of their patients who can benefit as well. That may make a doctor want to take the course and be a qualified physician. So that's really important work. Melanie made me think of another man that I highly, highly respect, who's in this industry, and that's Judge Doug Bench. And his story is amazing because, he was a judge. He was responsible for, I think, a magistrate judge. He was responsible for sending people to prison. He said he sent 300 people to prison for marijuana-related crimes.
What's his name?
Doug Bench. And it was another state. It wasn't in Florida where he was a judge. But then he got sick. So when he got sick and he was given 20 months to live, then he was still opposed to marijuana. He believed all the stigma, the reefer madness stuff, it's bad, the war on drugs, DARE, all that propaganda that they put out there, and he didn't want to take it. His wife insisted, and she actually started, making available in his food and things like that, and his health started improving. So he went from being at the point where, you know, he had a death sentence. He was going to die within 20 months. To he's healthy, he's strong, and he actually does cannabis education. He's a strong advocate. He does cannabis education at his ranch, Colorado. So that's someone who was opposed to it, but it helped them. It saved their life, and now they've become an advocate. So we encourage those of you who are benefiting to share your stories. We also encourage those of you who may be self-medicating, now that there is a legal way to get access to medical marijuana, please pursue the legal way. You know, when in Colorado, as it went through legalization, there was like an increase in arrests for marijuana-related crimes, because now that there's a legal way, you're not doing it the legal way. So we still don't want you. We don't agree with that. We don't want you vulnerable for prosecution. So if you are self-medicating, that's one of the reasons we do this webinar, is to tell you what you are allowed to have, so you can have that discussion with your physician. And you know, the patient count goes up, which is good for everyone, and then we'll get more dispensaries, etc. But in addition to that, you have another option as far as your quality of health, your quality of life, your quality of health. So definitely encourage those conversations with your physicians. If your physician is resistant to, you know, recommending, you know, there's a lot of great information and materials provided by the Florida Cannabis Coalition on that you can direct your physician to. Like, some of the seminar videos are great. Some of them are on YouTube as well. This video would be great. Dr. Michelle Weiner did a medical marijuana for seniors webinar a couple weeks ago, and that's phenomenal. So that content is available, and you know, if you can't find it, just contact Carlos and he'll point you in the right direction. But if you direct your physician to those materials, maybe it'll change their mind. Another thing that I would do is encourage them to attend, like, the Canna Day that's coming up in Miami. That's going to be a huge event. It's great discussions. So encourage your physician in that way. So I didn't want to get on the soapbox or start advertising, but there is some good stuff where, you know, sometimes a video makes all the difference. So, like, send your doctor the video of the person with Parkinson's within, you know, less than a minute having a regular conversation. Send your doctor, you know, the video of someone having an epileptic seizure and then they stop seizing immediately. You know, dispensaries now in Florida, they're starting to have the nasal sprays, which are extremely effective as well. So, you know, there are a lot of options. There's different delivery systems. We can talk about delivery systems. Well, not here. So let's talk about delivery systems a little bit. So currently in Florida, you can use sublingual oil. So it may be called also a tincture. It's something that you put a few drops under your tongue, or whatever your recommended dosage is from your doctor, under your tongue, and you take it orally. That is legal in the state of Florida. We have vaping. You can vape medical marijuana. That's huge. That's vaping is, like, I think the first mechanism for delivery that gets it into your system fastest, and vaping is also really good to get it into your system. And then there are, you know, suppositories. I'm not sure if I haven't heard that the dispensaries here are carrying it, but suppositories are legal. Edibles, as of this new legislation, are illegal. However, the edibles cannot look like characters. They really can't have any coloring in them. They cannot be in any way, shape, or form appealing to children. So those of you who are like, I want to bake, I want to cook, we're not there yet. So when you hear, we can't make cookies. When you're hearing that edibles are legal, yes, it still has to go through a license, MMTCC. No, California is completely different. Right? Yeah, California is a full recreational state, a variety of edibles, but in Florida here, a lot of precautions about edibles, and can't look like candy. They definitely want to make sure that it won't be a hazard to children. So,
really quick, I just want to, because we only got 15 minutes left. You know, if you out there are, you know, someone who's interested in becoming an advocate, you can go on to the patientswithpatients.org site, and you can click on the advocacy button and go on to careers, and it says sign up, and you can sign up for the next webinar, July 8th, to become a certified advocate with Patients, meaning you'll be able to be overseen by a senior advocate. You will be able to advocate for them, help them through their difficulties with chronic illness, give them access and try and figure out how they can find access to medical marijuana the legal way, the right way. You can also find us on Facebook. We are Patients with Patients of America. And if you type that in, you'll find us. And then we also have our Instagram, which is Patients with Patients. You just at Patients with Patients and you'll find us. And on Twitter, of course, same thing, but it's different on Twitter. We shortened it to PWP of America on Twitter. So you have multiple streams. We have a 24-hour hotline service that you can call, that if something is going on and say you wanted to talk to an advocate, or somebody who may need an advocate, it's best to just call us directly, because then you can get somebody live, leave a message if somehow we don't answer, but most of the time we answer. Just in case, just go on and say, hey, I need an advocate. I just need to talk. I need to find some support. It's 561. I'll make sure I put it in the notes. It's 561-371-8690. You can go ahead and I'll put it in the chat notes so you can get it. Call us, let us know how you feel. Let us know if you need access to medical marijuana. We'll connect you with Scheril if necessary. Yep. Scheril will make sure that you get what you need. She'll direct you to who you need. And it's really important to, find any way that it is accessible to you. Whatever works for you, do it. Don't let anybody tell you it's not the right thing to do, because it's your life, it's your body, it's your disease, and you have to do what's necessary for you. And if you can, I say to myself, listen, Melanie, I'm not always going to be 100%, but on the days that I'm 100%, if I know that this works for me, I'm going to do it, because I have so many things to do, and I have to get back to what I know, which is getting on track and reaching goals and aspirations. So do it. And, thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you so much, Scheril. I really appreciate it. I mean, I will love to continue to talk to you guys on another platform, or even if anybody has questions for me, just call and we'll definitely get anything answered. patientswithpatients@gmail.com is our email. It's very easy. Everything is kind of in coordination, so you can just type it in and we'll find us.
Yeah, so now you have the information how to stay connected with Patients with Patients. And again, I'm very accessible as well. I like the idea of, if you do want to serve in this way, please sign up to be an advocate. We can't have enough of those advocates. Also, I gave you some instructions on caregivers, but I just wanted to let you know there is a class required as well for becoming a caregiver, and there's the fee cannot exceed $100. So more information on that will become available from the Department of Health. I mentioned earlier, so as you know, I am general counsel for Patients with Patients. I provide their legal services. I am general counsel for Minorities for Medical Marijuana. I am also counsel for Bud for Vets. So that's another great organization that supports veterans. So if you need a veteran that needs services, or they're struggling with getting access to medical marijuana, look up Bud for Vets and contact them. Heather is, the president of that organization. I am vice president of High Life Media. So with that said, we have High Life Magazine. We're also coming out with a youth version, High Life Youth. In High Life Magazine, we welcome contributors. So if you're interested in writing or sharing your story, please let us know. We're working on issue 7, which is our July issue. We're working on it actually this weekend. So we'd love for you to contribute we pretty much have our articles for July, but for our August issue, we'd love to hear some of your stories and some of your struggles, or if there are any heroes that we need to recognize, we'd like to include that in the magazine. From an education standpoint, which is one of my main areas of advocacy, myself and my partner, Bob Riley, we're starting a foundation called Holistic Education Means Progress. And our target is also known as the Hemp Foundation, so HEMP, Holistic Education Means Progress. We are targeting physicians, farmers, pharmacists, and families with our education, and we have a variety of touch points. So if you want to get involved, please, you can contact me. I'll give you my email address. Now it's SMP, like Sarah Michael Paul, but SMP Esquire, ESQUIRE, at outlook.com. That's SMP Esquire at outlook.com. And you can just send me an email if you want to write for High Life, get engaged with the magazine, or have some type of role for the Hemp Foundation. We are currentently looking at faculty because we're going to have a camp for next summer where we're going to do education about medical marijuana as well as hemp, and then some specific training for children, some anti-bullying type information as far as being sensitive to children who, because of their illnesses, they do have to take medical marijuana and things like that. From a CBD perspective, as I mentioned, I distribute Green Roads World products. CBD is a great other opportunity in the cannabis industry as far as helping people. Some people don't necessarily want the high. We're seeing a lot of success. We're in 250 doctors' offices in Florida. So doctors are, actually selling the product to their patients. Some of it was, well, we have 90 days, let's try you with CBD. And then some people just didn't want the high, or their job won't allow them to test positive for THC. So if you're in that situation, I don't want you to feel as if you don't have any options. We have law enforcement that takes our CBD products. We have, oils, we have gummies, we have lollipops and jollies and like Jolly Ranchers. So there's a variety of products that are available without the euphoric effect that do have health benefits. But all that said, with the recognition that some people need the actual full THC. And that's why, even though we have that as an alternative, we continue to fight for access for patients, both access in their physicians' offices, access from a geographic perspective, access from a minority diversity perspective. We're going to continue to fight so those doors will be open. We want to reduce the stigma associated with the cannabis industry overall. If people would be open enough to come to one of the Florida Cannabis Coalition events, they'll see that cannabis isn't stoners and, drug dealers and things like that, all those previous perceptions. The cannabis industry is a lot of people in suits. A lot of business owners, a lot of people who are in the wellness world, very health specific. A lot of people are coming to find that this is the answer for a lot of illnesses. So we invite you to join us. Carlos mentioned previously that that I'm hosting another webinar at first week in July, actually. So July 1st. So you could say the end of the month or the beginning of the next month, but on July 1st, same time, I will be hosting a webinar with my partner, Bob Riley. He is the publisher of High Life Magazine, president of High Life Media. I'm the vice president of High Life Media and associate publisher. And we're going to talk about advertising in the cannabis industry, which has been challenging. You don't see cannabis ads on television, but that's all changing. So I don't want to give any spoilers. However, we're going to tell you what are the creative ways that if you are in the business or if you are a physician, how you can advertise and reach out to clients legally. If you're a dispensary, because there are in the new legislation, there are rules around dispensaries, how they can advertise, what mediums they can use to advertise. And there's also educational dollars that are included in the bill as well for messaging and where those advertisements can take place. So with that all said, please join me on July 1st at my next webinar, which is about advertising in the cannabis industry. I'm going to see if there are any additional questions. I think I don't see any further questions. I spoke about Regulate Florida earlier. So if you want to get involved, I guess I'll close out by talking about how do you get involved. Regulate Florida is one of my favorite organizations because of the work they do with petitioning. Normal as well, of course, but let's talk about Regulate Florida and their petition they have out now. Again, it's a 4-page petition. Please sign. They are in need of volunteers. So if you care enough about what's happening and what you'd like to see happen, they'd love volunteers to go to events and collect signatures. If you know of like a big concert and you know the person producing it or promoting it, or any venue where there's going to be a lot of people, let us know, and then we can send people out to Regulate Florida if you can out to get the petition, collect petition signatures. So if you have that type of access, also let us know about that. Every time I speak, I always give honor and pay homage to 2 organizations that I think have been influential in getting us here, that have been around for decades working. One is Normal. Normal's been over 40 years, when it was very unpopular, when there was a lot of stigma, fighting for legalization. And the other organization is Patients Out of Time. They're the first organization to provide CMEs to physicians and nurses, and they had medical education on cannabis, long before we were even thinking about it as an industry or a legal thing or the possibility of it becoming legal. So I always want to mention those 2 organizations every time I speak, and pay homage to them. So, that's basically all that I have. Carlos, if you feel free to take over. I see no questions. So, hey, Carlos.
Hi.
How are you?
That was a wonderful webinar, ladies. Thank you so much for all that information.
Thanks for the platform. We appreciate all that you do.
Thank you.
I mean, no worries, no worries. All in a day's work. Yeah, I mean, if there's no further questions or if you guys have anything you want to say, now's the time to say it.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's always great to connect. We're email away, or just check out the websites mentioned.
Yeah.
And for all you guys on there viewing right now, if you're interested in joining the Florida Cannabis Coalition, it's very easy. There's a big green button underneath your screen that says Join the Florida Cannabis Coalition. Just go ahead and click that. You'll see all of the membership options that I went over at the beginning of the webinar. And I believe there are a few questions about whether or not this webinar will be recorded. You can actually access it through the link that all you guys click to register for the webinar. I will be taking the recording and putting it up on YouTube, putting it on our Facebook or whatnot. But before I do that, you guys do have access. You guys did register for the webinar to just go ahead and click the link and view the recording right after the webinar. So, yeah.
Thank you, Carlos. We love you.
I don't think
Florida Cannabis
Coalition. Anything else to go over. Love you all. And
all right.
Thanks.
See you guys July 1st. Bye.
Bye.